And I agree with the members on both sides of the aisle here who don't want to target any group based on political ideology or any kind of ideology. But I'll tell you, this 501c4 category is one that demands serious attention by the IRS. And I think because of the Supreme Court rulings, and perhaps because of insufficiencies in the law itself, what is deemed political and worthy of oversight is not well expressed, perhaps. Perhaps there's a shortcoming in the law. I would like to place on the record two articles, one from Forbes magazine and one from Mother Jones, that relate to one organization that I would guess is a 501c4, Freedom Works, in which their top leader resigned last year, stating that it appeared to him that the leaders of the organization were trying to produce a book entitled Hostile Takeover, which would jeopardize the organization's C4 status. Now, obviously you can't give a lot of information here today about the hundreds of organizations you've looked at, but just on the hunch that there might have been some smart people working in the Cincinnati office who were concerned that there were a lot of new 501c4 filings in this country, and that there have been tax cheats in the history of this country, that maybe somebody over there at IRS was actually doing their job. And though your testimony can't reflect any of that, I'd like to say I believe that there might be some of those people over there. And that, in fact, if they were trying to find people who wanted to be hidden donors and not be on record, then I think the American people ought to take a second look at this. And you can't state a lot in your testimony today, but Inspector General, you listed a couple things here in your testimony. Inappropriate criteria were developed and stayed in place for a total of more than 18 months. Of course, you don't say what those inappropriate criteria were. You talk about substantial delays in processing. Most Americans got their refund in time this year, despite the almost $1 billion that was taken away from IRS. I think a lot of people at IRS are working very hard. And then there were unnecessary information requests. Well, if you're trying to figure out who secret donors are, and if an organization is really a 501c4 and not overstepping its boundaries under the spirit of the law, maybe there might be some delays. So I'm asking myself some questions after listening to you and reading your testimony and finding that I need more that isn't in there. So let me ask you, of the hundreds of organizations that you've reviewed, will any of those names be available for the record, or are those hidden to the public?
Title 26, Section 6103 places very severe limitations on who we can reveal taxpayer information to. It's limited to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. They and the chairman of the Joint Tax Committee. They, in turn, can share that information with the various members of their committees. But they, too, have restrictions, limitations on who they can share taxpayer information with. So that is part of the reason why, Congresswoman, a lot of the names are not provided in our report.
I'm glad to have that clarification. I'm glad to know that the Constitution is working a little bit here. Let me ask you, Mr. Inspector General, some media outlets have been reporting that the IRS targeted only conservative organizations, and your report does not state that the organizations asked to provide additional information were only conservative groups. Consequently, is it correct to assume that organizations other than conservative organizations were inappropriately asked to provide additional information about their tax-exempt applications? And if so, approximately what percent of the total that were reviewed?
Percent, I'll see if one of my colleagues can provide that information. But once again, Congresswoman, some of the groups that were identified in the 296 that we were able to look at who were placed in this category of political activity, part of that group by name were agnostic. We couldn't tell one way or the other whether they were progressive, conservative, what have you. But of that 296 that we were able to examine who were placed in that category, 72 were identified as Tea Party, 13 were identified as patriot groups in their names, and 11 had the 9/12 date/name in their name.
So theoretically, some liberal groups could have been in the majority then.
That is
of
correct.
groups that were looked at.
Your time has expired.